That was President Trump in Ohio last night telling us what he thinks about the elite. You're the elite. You'll hear what I think in a moment, and also what Tammy Bruce thinks, who I'm delighted to say is with us for the whole hour tonight. There she is. Evening, everyone, and welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism. We'll be talking about immigration and the wall, a new plan to make Congress more accountable, and we'll bring you part 2 of our blockbuster Swamp Watch on China's corrupt influence operations in Washington, D.C. But first, back to those elites. For me, the most important term is not actually the elite. You can be part of the elite and still be on the side of the people. But elitism. Elitism is an ideology that prioritizes the interests of those at the top. And it's been the dominant ideology in American politics for the last few decades. A big part of elitism is globalism. The idea that we should put some vague notion of the global interest ahead of the national interest. Now, there was a story this week that is a perfect encapsulation of elitist globalist thinking. And I want to start with it tonight. It was reported that tech giant Google is working with the Chinese government to develop a search engine that implements the regime's censorship of information it doesn't like. This is part of Google's plan to get back into China after it pulled out in 2010 in protest at the Chinese government's hacking of Gmail. This story is very personal for me. The China part is personal because my parents are Hungarian. I know all about oppressive communist regimes, and believe me, that's what today's China is. The Google part is personal because my wife once worked there, and we now have a very comfortable life as a result. Some of Google's top executives are close friends. But you know me by now, when I think something is wrong, I'll say so, whomever it may offend. And this is not just wrong, it's shameful. Of course, it's not the whole story about Google. I use Google all the time. I'm sure you do too. It's important to be fair and reasonable. Google's products are useful, and that's why it's grown so big. But it's because it got so big that Google is now not just useful, but dangerous too. It is a leading force for elitism and globalism. It's the essence of globalism that businesses have no loyalty to their home country. For more than most corporations, America really is Google's home. Did you know that Google got started thanks to a program run by the US government? Google wouldn't exist if it wasn't for American taxpayers. Google once said its mission was to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible. Its motto was, "Don't be evil." But now they floated off in a giant balloon of arrogance, untethered to any notions of loyalty or ethics. Google is helping America's #1 enemy, the evil communist dictatorship in China, to oppress its own people through censorship. Literally the exact opposite of what Google once stood for. Remember, too, that Google has built an artificial intelligence center in Beijing. Even though the Chinese regime is openly saying it will use artificial intelligence to achieve military and economic dominance over America. On top of that, Google recently pulled out of helping our own Defense Department with artificial intelligence. So Google, born of a US government program, won't work with our government to defend democracy, but is falling over itself to work with the world's worst despots to crush democracy. I know the word treason is thrown around too much these days, but that seems like a pretty good definition of it to me. This is Google's CEO, Sundar Pichai. Someone I know personally. And now I'm talking to you, Sundar, directly. If you go through with this, it will show the world that you no longer believe in your own mission of making information available. You just want to make more money available to you. It will expose all those sanctimonious, high-minded tweets and statements about human rights and standing up for values as pure BS. It will confirm that Google is driven by one thing: maximizing GCP, greed, control, power. Of course, you wouldn't come on this show to defend yourself, and I know why. Partly, you just refuse to be accountable. But there's a worse reason. China told you not to talk about this. You're not only working with the communist dictators to censor in China, you're doing their bidding by censoring yourself in America. If you go ahead with this, I will come after you with everything I've got, and I won't be the only one. But there is still time for you to change. Don't do this. Do the right thing. In a phrase, don't be evil. All right, follow us at NextRevFNC and at Steve Hilton X, and let us know what you think. Now let's see what our panel think. In New York, Fox News contributor and president of Independent Women's Voice, Tammy Bruce. And here in Los Angeles, Wisconsin Congressman Mike Gallagher and Hoover Institution senior fellow Victor Davis Hanson. What a great team. I want to start with Tammy. What is your take on this whole situation, Google and China?
Well, I love your opening monologue, and this is what's interesting for all of us. Look, as a capitalist, I want individuals and companies to become as big and as wonderful as they possibly can be. But one of the luxuries we get when you become extremely successful, Google is now number 4, the biggest tech company in the world. Fourth, Apple is number 1. And so they're still big enough, right? But you gain a luxury of being able to start to make decisions based on some kind of a moral footing. Now, the world did this when it came to South Africa, as an example. The apartheid regime, of course, was evil and horrible, and the world banded together to isolate South Africa, especially with sports, but of course also financially, to try to move them away from the apartheid regime, and that worked, of course. We're now in a situation where the global argument has been made that there really are no borders in general. And that, I think, has helped facilitate the idea that working with China is no big deal. And I think that part of the argument, of course, for Google internally is, well, we want to be competitive. Look at now, Apple is also in China. Apple, in its iCloud, with its iCloud partner in China, actually works through a Chinese telecom. Now, and of course, in the tech industry, Bloomberg has just reported that China is actually taking active moves to nationalize the entire tech industry there. So you've got Google deciding to try to move in, as China is admittedly nationalizing effectively, controlling, which they do generally everything, certainly with the tech sector, and Google, with whatever they do, in addition to, it's not just the search engine, Steve, it's also a cloud-based server dynamic that they want to move into China as well, which would also be involved with a Chinese partner, which means China would have access to whatever it is that's in data on that server. So it is about facilitating this kind of despot dynamic, a tyranny, and doing so with the imprimatur, if you will, of being an American company and American values. But it's facilitating a tyranny that I think all of us should stand up against.
Right. Well, I love you, Tam.